Bo Manju Shiri Ye, Nama So Shiri Ye, Nama Wo Nama Shiri Ye So Ha, Wo Namo Manju Shiri Ye, Nama So Shiri Ye, Nama Wo Nama Shiri Ye So Ha, Ye Ju Dang Su Ge Ju Nang, Jiang Ju Ma Du Nan Ni Gap Su Ji, Da Ge Chu Ni Ji Be Cong Nang Gi, Ru La Ben Jie Sang Ge Zhu Ba Shu, Ju Dang Su Ge Ju Nang La, Jiang Ju Ma Du Nan Ni Gap Su Ji, Da Ge Chu Ni Ji Be Cong Nang Gi, Ru La Ben Jie Sang Ge Zhu Ba Shu, Ju Dang Su Ge Ju Nang La, Jiang Ju Ma Du Nan Ni Gap Su Ji, Da Ge Chu Ni Ji Be Cong Nang Gi, Ru La Ben Jie Sang Ge Zhu Ba Shu, Thē gē chū shī mē tō chā, rī rāb līk shī nī tē kēn bā tē, sā kē shī tō mī tē mō yē, rō kē nā tā shī lā chū bā shū, gu rū rā nā mē tā lā kāng tī yā tā yā mī. Please adjust your sitting posture according to the 7 meditative postures of Vairocana. Think, all sentient beings have been my mothers. All sentient beings have been my mothers, not just once, but numberless times. All sentient beings are as kind as my mother in this life. Even though all kind mother sentient beings want happiness and do not even want a small suffering due to mistakenly engaging with objects of adoptions and objects of abandonment, they do not experience any happiness but suffering. In our minds, sincerely cultivate loving kindness towards all kind mother sentient beings by thinking, how nice it would be if all kind mother sentient beings were to have excellent happiness and the causes of excellent happiness that are virtues. May they have excellent happiness and its causes. I will cause them to have excellent happiness and its causes. Lama deity, please bless me to be able to do so. Next we cultivate compassion towards all suffering mother sentient beings by thinking, how nice it would be if all mother sentient beings were free from all sufferings and the causes of suffering that are non-virtues. May they be free from all suffering and its causes. I will cause them to be free from all suffering and its causes. Lama deity, please bless me to be able to do so. Next, we cultivate bodhicitta. First, we ask ourselves, who should take the responsibility to free mother sentient beings from the sufferings of samsara and low realms? I should take the responsibility. Even though I should take the responsibility, I do not have the ability to place them in the state of perfect complete enlightenment now. Who has such ability? Those perfect or complete Buddhas have the abilities to do so. Therefore, for the sake of all mother sentient beings, by all means, I will achieve the precious state of enlightenment. Next, we meditate on emptiness for a short while. The self and the aggregates neither exist as inherently one, nor as inherently different, thus is empty of inherent existence. Set a good motivation. For the sake of all mother sentient beings, I will achieve the state of enlightenment. For this, I will listen to the holy teaching and practice properly in order to benefit sentient beings. So today we are going to start from verse 130. So it's under the outlines of the mind naturally pure, but with adventitious defilement. Verse 130, it says, just as the afflictions neither exist by way of their own nature, nor are they in the nature of the mind, so the realm of sentient beings, so the realms of sentient beings or the basic elements of sentient beings is not tied to the shell of afflictions. Existing since beginningless time is the nature of the mind, emptiness of true existence. Since beginningless time is the Tathāgata essence, free of defilements. This are to Shava Mari.
Sada Shava Kemaris.
Sada Shava Mari.
Sinjil Gilape, say, I need to be Tomadi, Sada Shava Kemaris, Sada Pa, Jikaba Kemaris, Tomani Bangaris.
So to explain this verse, then we go to notes 130. It says, emptiness, the undefined nature of the mind, is said to exist since beginningless time, because the coverings of afflictions of the basic elements of sentient beings is neither inherently mixed with nor intrinsic to the mind since beginningless time. So here it says, the undefined nature of the mind is said to exist since beginningless time. So it means that this undefined nature of the mind is not newly established and is not newly refuted. So it exists since beginningless time. So because the coverings of afflictions of the basic elements of sentient beings is neither inherently mixed with nor intrinsic to the mind since beginningless time. So this line established that those defilements are adventitious. Then we go to next verse, verse 131. So here is to identify the 9 defilements. And verse 131 says, attachment, anger, ignorance, their dormant states, their forceful arising, the abandonments of the path of meditation and path of seeing, and those pertaining to the pure and impure grounds. So here's to identify the 9 defilements, and we go to extra notes. So we have already gone through these 9 defilements. So as first learners or first time learning these 9 defilements, so it's good to repeat it again so that we can understand it better. So there are 9 aspects with regard to the obscuring defilements. So basically it talks about the 9 defilements. So there are 3 latent ones. So the latent attachment, latent hatred, and latent ignorance. And the strong arising of the 3 refer to this one, to these 3. And then the 5th one is the grounds of the imprints of ignorance. And number 6 is objects of abandonments of Hinayana path of seeing, and objects of abandonments of Hinayana path of meditation. Defilements based on the impure grounds. So impure grounds refers to a 7th ground and below. And defilements based on the pure grounds. So 7 impure grounds and 3 pure grounds, and 3 pure grounds refer to 8, 9, and 10th ground. Then next verse is verse 132, first 2 lines, and they say, are well illustrated by the 9 similes of the covering of a lotus and so forth. Here is to identify indicating the 9 similes. So, and here it says, are well illustrated by the 9 similes of the covering of a lotus and so forth. So to explain these, so the subject, the indication through the 9 similes, such as the covering of a lotus, has a purpose because it is for the sake of realizing the 9 defilements, such as attachment, as adventitious. So the purpose of illustrating or indicating the 9 defilements through the 9 similes, such as the covering of a lotus, is to realize that defilements are not intrinsic to the nature of the mind, and these defilements are adventitious. That's all. So then we go to next 2 lines of verse 132. It says, is under the outlines of limitless divisions of instances. And under this outline is verse 232, next 2 lines. third line and fourth line, and also 133. So he says, but the divisions of the shells of subsidiary afflictions is also translated as, can also be translated as secondary afflictions, go beyond the limits of division. And verse 133. 133. He says, summarizing the 9 defilements, attachment and so forth, they have been well explained in their respective order by the examples of the chalice of the lotus and so on. So to explain next two lines of verse 132 and verse 133, I will go to extra notes. So he says, so there is a reason for not extensively indicating the divisions of secondary afflictions here, because the divisions of the coverings of secondary afflictions are beyond limit. When afflictions such as attachments are condensed into 9, respectively, they are correctly indicated by the 9 similes, such as the covering of a lotus. So here it doesn't extensively indicate the divisions of secondary afflictions, because if it were explained extensively, then in text or in scriptures, then afflictions are so they are 84,000 afflictions. So therefore, it means there are many. They are limitless, as in there are many. So it's not extensively indicated here, and afflictions such as attachments are condensed into 9. So in condensed, so those afflictions which are the obscuring, which are the obstructor or the obscuring afflictions. So they are condensed into these 9 together with the 9 similes, such as a covering of a lotus.
That's all the issue. The issue
So then we go to verse 134. Verse 134, it says, by way of those defilements, the childish ordinary beings, Hinayana Arhats, Hinayana Arya learners, and the wise Mahāyāna Aryas are explained to be impure in their respective order by 4, 1, 2, and 2 defilements.
다 마다비 간사 다 마다비 간사 시 담보 시들이 얼마 보셔야 되는가 담보 간사 시 그래서 다 정말 진짜 간사 수기라 마다 방에 때만 지는 거
So here he says, by way of those defilements, the childish ordinary beings, arhats, learners, the wise, are explained to be impure, right? So here we are going to talk about the beings and also defilements and why they are impure. So okay, they are called impure because of respective defilements. Childish ordinary beings, Hinayana arhats, learners, and intelligent bodhisattvas. So impure can also refers to these 9 defilements, and then in whose minds do these 9 defilements present? Then there are 4 impure beings, and these 4 impure beings refer to childish ordinary beings, Hinayana arhats, learners, and intelligent bodhisattvas or wise bodhisattvas.
다들 간사 시고 데려와 다 맞아서 다 두순지 반야 손도와 두순지 반야 손대다 다 대순지 근다 잡음에도 지금 시도와 대 시보데 다 소소 제원을 지라 마다 봐 예스 다 대시보데 소소 제원을 지라 마다 봐 예스 와 소소 제원을 지라 마다 봐 다 마리 바샤지 사데 내랑 다 준비 지라 마다 예스 내랑 다 준비 지라 마리 바샤지 사이와 다 마리 바샤지 사데 간다 내가 나중에 지나 못하고 예스 와 다 태매지 통바다 공반이요
얘랑 마타바 귤라 요래
내가 나중에 지나
얘랑 다 좀비
나중에 지나 못하고 예스
귤라 마타바 요래
마타바 요래 지나 못하고 예스
귤라 마타바 요세데 마타바 에네 데 지마데로
내가 나중에 지나 요데스 말 다요 예스
지마데 요라 나서 귤라 마타바 요래
나도 나가서 마타바도 그게 쉬고 마타바도 그게 가르치고 말이 바샤지 사데 내가 나중에 지나 마다바 지치 요레스 자주미 빠요 말와 마빠원스다 자주미 지나 마다바 요레스 자주미 지나 다요 레스 자주미 지나 요레스 자주미 지나 다바이가 자주미 뻔사마디 에 빠요 말와 마빠원스 당아서 마빠체네 근데 가도지 치틀라 마다바 자루 부다 마다바데 주마데 다요 말이시고 말이 바샤지 사데 내가 자주미게 빠요 말 마빠원스다 내가 자주미 지나 마다바 지치 니디 레스 니디 레스 다 테메지 통바다 공반이와 테메지 통바다 공반이데 다 테메 러버 비지라 테메 러버 파비지라 마다 봐 그랬어 다 테메 러버 파비지라서 테메 토나바다 고나바 니 비지라 마다 봐 그랬어 되는데 와 네 테메지
통방단
공반이도와 당은 테메 통바다 공반이도 찐바 치자로와 레레리 자와이나 통바데 통바다 통바다 맞아 고나발 자고래 공바서 고나발 자고래 소디 자고래와 냥도 러죠
로바 라로
테미 로바 파팔로 다 테미 다좀 나사로와 다 테미 로바 파파 지라 마다 봐 예스 테미지 통바다 공반이도와 테미지 통바다 공반이데 테미 로바 파파 지라 마다 봐 예스 와 테미 로바 파파 지라 마다 봐 예스 다 마다사 데이다 다바사스 정오까지 집어 줘라 마다사지가 다바스 정오까지 집어니 다 너데 장주 생각이라 마다 봐 너데 장주 생각 러바와 러바바와 로데 장주 생각 러바바바 티게 러바바와 티지 러바바바
당기 대한 토밍이 러바바바로
아디 티메지 러바바와
대한 티징이 봐
티게 러바바바 다 장세사 당문 주바바와 티메 러바바가 지나 마다 봐 예세 다 마다사 데이다 다바사스 정오까지 집어니 다 티제 러버 파비지라 마다 봐 근데 도도시나 티제 샤세 파비지라 마다 봐 그래서 난 그래 샤세 파비지라 마다 봐 그래서 다 그거들 다 마다 봐 그래서 되다
So they are called impure, and then because of these defilements, then these defilements there are impurities as well. So for example, the first 3, which is the 3 latent poisons: attachment, hatred, and ignorance, and their manifestation, which are counted as 1. And these 4 exist in these 4 impurities exist in the continuum
in the continuum of ordinary beings. So therefore, they are impure. So because in their continuum, they are impurities. So they are impurities or they are impure means that they have not abandoned their respective defilements. And for Hinayana Arhats, the teaming guitar jumba in that thing in Turkey, and Hinayana Arhats and refers to hearers Arhats and solitary realizers Arhats, and then the grounds of the imprints of ignorance. This impurity exists in their continua, and the impurity of the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing and the objects of abandonment of the path of meditation, and here is in the context of Hinayana. So the objects of abandonment of Hinayana path of seeing and the objects of abandonment of Hinayana path of meditation exist. These two impurities exist in the continua of learners. And learners here refer to Hinayana Aya learners. Hinayana Aya learners. So these two impurities exist in the continua of Hinayana Aya learners. And the last two defilements, the defilements based on the impure grounds and the defilements based on the pure grounds, these two impurities exist in the continua of intelligent bodhisattvas. So here, intelligent bodhisattvas, they are Mahāyāna Aya learners. Intelligent bodhisattvas, they are also called Mahāyāna Aya learners. So basically, it refers to bodhisattvas from the first ground until the 10th ground. So you can also say in brief, which is these two defilements or these two impurities exist in the continua of Aya bodhisattvas.
That thing also, that be the change in my head. Maybe the change the Kasi Chishar, that and I am to all my jelly. Kasi all my jelly shame. As you mean, to all my jelly shame. That and the continue to all my jelly shame. All jelly shame. That the Kasi Chishar, and let them out. And young also pay. So you put your children. That the kitchen was shoes and me and them. What? All jelly. I am this man. Jim to hear Jimmy. What? Bidi chindi chaya kanda diji tuma rwa diji good rwa diji good ma bidi chindi chaya diji tuma go that go tere la chindi chaya rwa tere chita pema ndanje de jindo juna yibada shine gawa minjo de chagawa deshi wose ta sholo go chindo wa oda dilma shile wa bidi chindi chaya.
And we go to verse 135. So here, basically, it talks about the correlation between correlation between the analogy and the meaning. So regarding this, so basically, it talks about the 9 defilements and the 9 analogies, which we have already explained before. So previously, when we explained these 9 defilements and the 9 analogies, then they are not they are explained without the root verse. And here in this context, they are explained together with their respective root verse. So the first, I will explain it again so that we will understand it better. And first verse is verse 135. It says, just as the presence of a lotus born from mud induces delight at first and fades in its attraction later on, the same is so for the pleasure of desire.
That's also the same for my shield. That's changing my kind of shield. That Tambo was a decision the child Palana, the shop Palana, that on the Pema the Chitsum, yes, that Pema the Chitsum is that Pema the Chitsum, Juzeka Resina. Did Juzeka Reta will my Juzin sometimes shape was. Chidam the child Palanya was said so that some of in a top table, the child Palanya was in the Chujin. The child Palanya, dear. Chile, Minister Chile, by the Chiva in the Tata, Quadrant Shire. The Shada Palanya, dear. The mother choose somebody, is that the Ninos at the Shada Palanya, the Chapalan, Anajura, get the mother choose somebody. Jensen Carrier, that is in shape. The Jensen today, in a that pay mother, Danjira, Pema down Jipati, Dindo, Sabatis, Sabitis, Hadam, Yikawa, Sabitis, Yikawa, Sabatis, Kanda Dirchigora, Zebushi Jorwa, Pema Sabakis, a sea to the Hidon, the Juriswa, the Hidon, the Juriswa. Then the Hidon, what you're Sabat, Hidon, Gawa, nothing what the Jurte. The Jela, the Shiniba Chanadi, the Gawa Juba, Gawa Chan, yes, Gora, almost Sabati Haja, you don't want Gawacha. She said, Niba Chanadi, the Pema the Pa, Nima Kashi Rosana, then in it, this is Suba Niba Chanua, Niba Chanadi, the Niba Chanu, yes, the Panini, then Zebusha Niba Chanu, yet then on Shilora, that the pit on she, and the charge, Gawaya, yet at somebody, yes, the gentleman, the Shah Gawaya, yet at somebody, yes, that deliver. During the Shala Jarwa, Peter was that Bemalma, Jarwa, with the Bema, Sawachia, during the Shala Jar, that there might be on the Chichi.
To explain this, latent attachment is similar to a lotus because in the presence of a lotus born from mud, one becomes mentally joyful when it's fresh and not joyful when it withers later. Similarly, the joys of attachment is similar to that. So then you can also understand it in this way. The subject, latent attachment, is similar to a lotus. So here, this part is the subject, and then this part is the predicate, and then the words follow the words after words after because is reasoning or reason. So here it says latent attachment is similar to a lotus because in the presence of a lotus born from mud, one becomes mentally joyful when it's fresh. So when a lotus is born, newly born from mud, so when it's fresh, when it's beautiful, when it's attractive, then it brings a mental joy, mental joy, and then not joyful when it withers later. So a few days later, then when that lotus is not fresh anymore, or when it becomes dry, when it dries up, then it doesn't bring joy to the mind anymore. So similarly, the joy of attachment is similar to that. So analogy that it is correlate to the analogy of a lotus. So the meaning is attachment.
That the Shalma Jarwa, that the Pit that Haran Havajua, Pit the Haran Imbaji, that other Pema the Sabachi with the Gala, Tanzish, you don't want, the Shibujere, the Nimakaji Jelama, that in Hajan Zebo, the Manyan, Nibara Chanua, that day in Shilo, and the Shal Pesha, and the Sharwa, and the Jade Simi Chip in the Shalawa, and the Jade Simi not to Jimua, Simi Jishwa. Simi Jibin, the Chachibana, Simi Jibin Jarwa, Simi Jibin, the Chade, that Chayo, that put up a Cardigan, a party Jaran Chibarwa, put up me, you don't want Zebo, the Yorwa, put up me, you don't want Zebo, Pony, the Hajan, Sena Gawachiba, Hajan, Sena Gawachiba. The Gawachin, Hajan, the Gawachuchimuchis. The Jigger the Ina, she's also, that put up more about it. That's also so far in that law, she got this kind of Hajan Gawachin is. That law, Dingy Jujupa later, that woman, she indeed Gawachi, never channel dinner, she, woman is. Hajan Gawatama Yanu is, she's what? She's not saying the Gawachi what here, Yanu, yes, Yanu, that dinner she has done the shadow one, and the shadow of dinner is. The payment paying shares one or delegation. That suggests the Kansas was Java.
So with the analogy of a lotus, so the lotus when it's fresh, then it brings mental joy, and when it withers or when it dries up, then it doesn't bring the mental. It doesn't bring mental joy. It doesn't bring. It no longer bring a mental joy. So then when it correlates with the meaning, then it relates. Then we need to relate to oneself or relates to the person whose mind latent attachment is present. So this attachment, which is generated by the improper mental attention. which is generated from the improper mental attention, and then this attachment, which is generated by improper mental attention, so relates in relation to the objects of attachment. For example, male and female. So there are attractive females and there are attractive males, and you can say the beautiful ones and the handsome ones. And then when those with attachment see those objects of attachment when they are very young. So when they look youthful, then it brings mental joy. So later, like for example, when they become old, when they become old, like 80 or 70 years old, and then when their youthfulness degenerates, then it no longer brings the mental joy. One no longer feel joyful looking at them. So attachment, which is generated from improper mental attentions, is just like the analogy of a lotus. Verse 136, he says, just as bees, when becoming greatly agitated, will sting, likewise, when hatred arises, suffering swells in the heart. Explain verse 136. He says, latent hatred is similar to bees. So bees is an analogy, and latent hatred is the meaning that it correlates with this analogy. So latent hatred is similar to bees because just as very agitated bees sting with their abdomens and bite with their mandibles, likewise, when hatred arises, it produces suffering in the heart.
tamala Quran so la ne ruwa Quran so ne de shena de ne yi ruwa wata ndung de jeo de rangi ni ga la ne ruwa as ruwa ramadi rangi ni ga la dunga chen ruwa rangi ni ga dunga cheba de cheba na shin lo ta shedan de garang ha de shedan de shedan o ge sin tuwa ina de shedan o ge sin tuwa ina de ganda yin la chi zu bo ma wa da ruwa chi zu bo ma wa da 리와기때 와기 치츠보마바다 리지보네 다 챤나서 바트리타와 다 이거여와 어디 리오데 라기니가 그리소라 내가 첨부리고 여러와 라기니가 그리소라 내가 첨부이 왔습니다 다 해당된 거네 드라마티가 정말 예스와 라기니가 그리소라 네네 동아 차치 못 찍으러 와서 간다 해당티 대나시 예스다 드라마나시 다 뜻배데 다다 싶은 정도와
So the subject is latent hatred. So here we are talking about the latent hatred through the analogy of bees. And so bees, they get agitated easily. And when they are agitated, then they will sting with their abdomens, and then they will bite with their mandibles. And then through this, not only does it harm others, it also harm the bees themselves, because when they sting or when they bite with their mandibles, and then they get killed in that way as well. So when they stings with their abdomens, so it definitely will bring a suffering to others, and then themselves after stinging the opponent or the person, and then they die because of this sting as well, because together with their stings, and then as in when they sting, and then when they pull, and then their abdomens or their innards may come out together with the sting. So in this way, not only does it harm others, and it also harms themselves as well. So similarly, latent hatred is just like this. Due to hatred, then verbally we speak harsh words, and physically then we attack others with weapons. So it will bring great harms to oneself and to others. So to our bodies, and to the bodies, and to our lives as well. So and through this harm, then this harm brings great suffering to oneself and to others.
The drama the channel the series on the channel pay yabu shingu jiwa ni chidang ma pe sha nol ta kora ni so de jodi ta ro ni kora do wa jeba ja ja ren do ta kashi sina so de jodi so de mi shi dal jodi so de mi shi da sha na su ne ko sha pa su do ne de ta ji la kora shi do de so do ta de ni shi go me ni ha ko ne ti chang de ge tina chang za ha ko ro de kan ji ko ni kora pe so de pa mi le su de kora shi do re ya kora na su che bu ta 근데 간에 이나서 그 정도 세리 좀 오종 나 수고 통하는 거 봐. 정도 하고 원래 정도 가.
다다 기자티어. So you all have learned science before, so I'm sure that you all know better than me. So when bees sting, so and definitely it will bring suffering to the person, for example, and then I heard that when bees stings, and then their sting will stuck in the bodies, and then they will die, or they will survive. And what do you all know about these bees, whether they survive after stinging, or they die after stinging a person, for example? So it's a question. So what do you all think, and or what have you learned from the science about bees?
They die after they sting.
It depends on types of bees also. Some bees does, as Denver said, some do not. So some types of bees die after they got sting, some do not. Some strong ones.
가시기 가장 지기랑 시기에서 아니한테 또 아니 준루이나 시기에 대가버리 아니 또 이나한테 가시기 양 시기에서 가시기 시마에서 아니한 가상한테 수포 또 첸데라 레기오에서 또 칠류라 레기오에
그럼 컵 지나리라 칼소 지구라 칼소 지구라 지구라 말았어. 칼 지구라 지구라 말은 아직 컵도보다 야도 판도가 그런. 네 지구래가 아직 칼소 지구라. 네가 지구라 가능해. 네 좋아지.
And another question is, do bees sting, or do they bite as well, or do they do both?
Geshe-la, the answer is they do both bite and sting, but the bite is not as bad as the sting. And whereas for the sting, well, most of the bee die because the needle or the stinger is attached to the body, the abdomen of the bee. So when you try to pull it out, the needle or the stinger stick to the skin, and it pull out the whole body of the bee. So the bee actually die, and then even though the bee doesn't have any blood, but more or less like they bleed to death. So actually they die actually.
Di William di shevare ene di niga resa ene dia so kya thang kha kya de kyablo de kha kya niga de chigi resa ene di so kya wa ina diang shi ma resa ene di kha kya wa ina ene di kha kya chang ene kan isna kap de yang kung so isubo nang lo la kap kaza changma gi kap ina dang changma gi nang lo Ampina di Kumada, any Deniga de Jagioresa. Chesani Dian Kap Gawaina, the Kap de Subanalo de Ja, de Shaya Dine, the young Patin Bika line, the young because of Kumada, when and Nanglogi, Nangbo, and Joining and the Yamdu, Tengiresa, Chesani the Mancho, the Shiresa.
Thank you. That is what just the channel how quite here. That was Naji, a younger meeting, Jogan Yabadina, dramas in Mitan as a very talent. This is super drama, and she is a lover. That then as a patient, she done page out of that, double of shoes out that.
Yeah, so thank you very much. So I say for all the knowledge that you mentioned here. So in our saying, in Tibetan saying, then we call those with bad behaviors or bad conduct. We call them like they are beasts. So it means that they are very agitated or they are easily agitated, and then their behavior or their conduct is kind of rude. So here in this text, they also correlates they also use the analogy of beast to illustrate latent hatred.
Yeah, that thank you. I'm not so much to say. Not to share down the girls at work. Not to move on now, somebody can do it. But not somebody. Not somebody can bimba somebody, is it? Somebody bimba what? Bimba who go around drinking bimba. The Jinzi Carre is now. Jealous of the Nimbone, Shiro, Bimbi Didi, that's why. Bimbi Jibata,
Low in Big,
Bimba Didi,
Sawa de Low China.
Solo say, almost Tibetan Buddhism or Shiro Bimbi Jimbata, the Jinimbi Kantama, Marie Gumi, which is what they thought on this.
So then we go to verse 137. It says, just as a kernel of rice and so forth is covered by the outer husk, so the understanding of the Tathāgata essence is obstructed by the shell of ignorance.
How do you tell that machine? That you tell over there. That Tumpala the Kanda, Tumpana, that Bimba that somebody is it. Sumbi, Junse Carresena, that Jera Subi, Nimbo de, that should Bimbi Diggerwa, Jade Nimbo Tanada, so Sayata Nimbo the one. Saya Nimbo, they don't have Bimba Diggers. That was a Bimba the chief of the religion Salamara, Satumara, Bimba Pamakuna, and Satumara. Or that is Nimbo to the Bimba Tibanashi, that the issue Nimbo, there was no Tona, that Marie Goma, which was Marie Batsobe, and Yumut Sobe, that Butch Diggers. The Marie Bata, the shoe chamber with it, I don't know. That they did it, but I'm with this.
So explain verse 130. Verse 137. Latent ignorance is similar to husk because just as the rice grain and so forth are obscured by the outer husk, the direct perceptions of the meaning of the essence is obscured by the shells of ignorance. So the subject is latent ignorance, and then it is similar to husk because just as the rice grain and so forth are obscured by the outer husk. So the rice grain is the kernel, or you can say is the rice grain, or rice grain is within the husk. So if and is obscured by the outer husk. Without removing the outer husk, then we cannot enjoy the rice grain. So similar to this analogy, the direct perceptions of the meaning of the essence is obscured by the shell of ignorance. So it means that if one has, due to strong ignorance, then the direct perceptions of the meaning of the essence is obscured.
I think also that you want to Maripa the two days that choosing new Tuana and Tuana also Tuana Gita Jirwa. That also, Jadang also, the ocean Nimo. That the ocean Nimo, they also Tuana, that for degree, as it was, no Tuana Gita, as it was. That big Chawan was a Sujo Dawes. Sujo Dawes, the Kanda, Sujo de, Omani, new day, Musu Tuana, that didn't get told that on that day. Wow. Timu Tongman Yigi, 동반이 니로 된 것을 통하라 뒤되게 해서 와 무슨 통하라 그래서 다 뒤에다 땅에서 빼잖아 수수 지워대 가서 와 다 수수 지워 되게 다 동반이 된 것을 통하라 다 동이 되지 되게 뒤되고 통주고요 동이 되지 되고 휴청보 요와 선상 휴청보 요와 선상 다 저는 간다 동반이 된 것을 통하라 뒤되게 와 뒤되게 땅에서 간다 동이 되지 때 휴청보 머리바디 요 차이 신체나 최 가르지 내놓지 왜 내지 간다데 가르지 시고나 땅원에 비 다버지 힘 맞지 봐 뒤되어 간다 그때 가서 미라 싫어 빠빠지 꾸는데 미리 세번만 통만 더 되지 잡고도 와 그래서 미나고 도도지 와 미나고 도도들라 나서 로티스 채널이 빠빠지 꾸도 와 빠빠지 이래고도 와 그때 되지 이래고도 맞아 봐 통야라 다지다 로셔셔라 내고도 와 로셔셔라 내고도 와 이거 내고도 와 어다 뒤래고도 내가서 그게 세보 가리나면도 나 가리나 삼아 뭐 세보 통하나 뒤고도 와 다 대나시 레스 보러 당아서 tum이 되지 다 나가도 지자고도 맞아 대화시 민님보다 자꾸 와 대화시 민님보 무슨 통하나 디그리 간사 숫다든 대화시 민님보 무슨 통하 되게 수수 지워다 와 수수 지워다 보니 다 대화시 민님보다 무슨 통하나 디그리 해서 어디래 당아서 파파 대화시 민님보 무슨 통하나 디스데게 잡아라 무슨 통하나 디그 말이 산제발 디게 해서 보러 상세 파파 뒤에 파파 밑에 파파 여러와 파파 저게 대화시면 니 무슨 통하나 디스는 게 이거 말이야. 뭐로와 머리 받게.
그래서 응원수도 통하라. 통기어래.
통이나 다 이기야. 산지지 공부를 좀 하지 봐. 안다. 데디지 벌써 와. 말을 좀 하지 봐. 데디지 벌써 뭐로와.
So due to ignorance, true grasping, it obscures one from directly seeing the Tathāgata essence or the Tathāgata essence. For example, an ordinary being is obscured by the ignorance, the true grasping, from directly seeing the modes of abiding of emptiness. In other words, ordinary beings are obscured by the true graspings from directly seeing the meaning of emptiness. Meaning of emptiness. So as long as ignorance, the true graspings, exists or is present in one's continuum, then one is obscured from seeing phenomena, any phenomena, for example, and then it's just like someone with cataract. So some when they get old, then we have this cataract, right? So even nowadays, then it happens to young adults as well. So when due to this cataract, so whatever they see, then they cannot see it clearly, they cannot see it directly. So similarly, due to the cataract of ignorance, or the cataract ignorance of true grasping, then one cannot directly, or one cannot see phenomena or any phenomena clearly. So similar to this example. So someone's Anila, I think yeah. So your mind is not mute. Sorry. Yeah. So ordinary beings, for example, are obscured from directly seeing the Tathāgata essence. In this context, then we link it to Tathāgata essence. Then we will say ordinary beings are obscured by ignorance of true grasping from directly seeing the Tathāgata essence. So for Ayya Bodhisattvas, or for Ayya hearers or Ayya solitary realizers, so they are not obscured from directly seeing the Tathāgata essence. However, in other way of saying this is Ayya Bodhisattvas, Ayya learners, Ayya solitary realizers, and Ayya hearers, they directly sees the Tathāgata essence. However, they are still obscured. So they are obscured from attaining the Buddha, the state of enlightenment, or state of Buddhahood.
당어도 시바 that she was Jedam Mazam Mandimba, the Jin Chada Jenaji, the Batimbi Junish, the Puneta Mazanga Ase, or that it's always very well.
So even though those areas are not obscured from directly seeing the Tathāgata essence, they are obscured from attaining the state of enlightenment. So then next verse is verse 138. He says, just as filth is unpleasant, likewise in those with attachment, forceful arising of the three poisons acts as the cause for the reliance on the desire realm, and soul is likened to filth. So to explain verse 138, he says, the manifest arising of the three poisons is similar to filth, because just as impure blood and semen are discordant with those with cleanliness, likewise, the manifest three poisons are also discordant with those free of attachment. They are needed as causes for those with attachment to feel pleasurable sensation. So the manifest arising of the three poisons is similar to filth. So the analogy is filth. And then to illustrate the manifest arising of the three poisons, in other words, is the manifestations of the three poisons. And because just as impure blood and semen are discordant with those with cleanliness, likewise, the manifest three poisons are also discordant with those free of attachment. So the manifest three poisons are also discordant with those free of attachment. So those free of attachment, for example, are arhats. So these manifest three poisons are discordant with those free of attachment, such as arhat. And they are needed as causes for those with attachment, for example, ordinary beings, to feel pleasurable sensation or to experience a pleasant sensation, pleasurable sensation. So, so these manifest three poisons. So the intense arisings of three poisons are discordant with those aryas. So discordant with those aryas also means that these manifest three poisons are not present in the continua of aryas. And they are needed as causes for those with attachment to feel pleasurable sensations. It means that these manifest three poisons are present in the continua of ordinary beings, and thus they are obscured. Ordinary beings are obscured from attaining the ayas path, or it hinders ordinary beings from attaining ayas path.
Maybe Jose Casna, Tusun Munjua, Tapunjua, Tigi, Nimbo the Papigila later. Papigila, Tusun the Majua, Nimbo the Papigila Chili or
Mundu Makuya.
Oh, good, Jumata. Tusu Tapo, the Jumatuagi, Harichi, it was not. Papigila, Tusu Tapo, Munjua, Chimachi, Nimbo the Gilati, Nimbo the Munjua, Papigila, wow, Nimbo the Munjua. Papigila, Nimbo the Tusu Tapo, the Mother Chumatu, they Nimbo the Mother Chudi, there, Tusu Tapo the poor, with the Chutu. How about the Dimas? Wow, you want the Chutu of this. That is.
So he says that the manifest three poisons are also discordant with those free of attachment, or those discordant with those aryas. So it means that this manifest, there is no place, or there is no place in the continua of ayas. There is no place for the manifest three poisons to dwell in the continua of ayas. So there is no place, for example, there is no chair for them to sit, or for them to stay in the continua of ayas. So why do we say that? Is because in the continua in ayas continua, there is a manifestations of antidotes. So because the antidotes is manifest, because the antidotes is manifesting, therefore the three poisons are unable to manifest themselves. So because the antidotes to these three poisons are manifesting in the continua of ayas, so therefore three poisons are unable to manifest.
That was that was Maripacha Sangamadre, Chita Nunua, Chita Nun Dipina, and Mishite Tobata, Deji, Chela Ranjuni, Maripacha say this, that they show what you do, that you might show. That did Nabat Joa, Maripacha says you are, Nabat.
So next verse. Verse 139. So it talks about, it indicates the grounds of the imprints of ignorance, and which is the fifth defilement. And he says, just as precious treasure is buried, and one not knowing of it cannot obtain it, also for beings, the self-arisen Tathāgata essence is buried under the grounds of imprints of ignorance. Imprints of attachment. Yeah, so it's buried under the grounds of imprints of ignorance.
Jibana, that Mehi, Matara, the taking the Sudo, the Ranju Nimbo, me, we charge it up on the Marie Pasha did. Yes, but I'm digital, the Majil station.
Explain verse 139. The grounds of the imprints of ignorance is similar to the great earth, because just as when the wealth is covered by the earth, it becomes unknown, and the treasure is unattainable. Likewise, beings are obscured by the grounds of imprints of ignorance from completely seeing the very self-arisen essence.
That's the way it's a child. Marie Pacha is selling out such a patient, she's a Woroa, such a important hour. Of course, the Geo Chamber, she said, such a important such a one digit, the one of the day. I don't go to get to the Yobaina. I also know him major me pebble so get home to go marry, Ratu, Rawo, Marola, Rawa, 통도고 말을 사천부들이 사천부들이 원래 때 가봐야 하고 말아 때 가봐야 하고 말 사천부에서 때니 대낭시가 말아 전부 뭐 대매왔습니다 다들 돈 간다 통마 지금 몇 배밭 속에 통도고 막 내시면은 통 말아다 내시면은 뭐 통만나지 다 도고 말했어 그때 와 대낭시 다 지고 나지와 다스도 지고 나지 간다 수저로 랑주라 장치시다 대화시 님보들 와 간다 그래서 지원지다实际 원소지도变得 ran치시가 보여와 대화시 님보들 와 ran치시 칸 대화시 님보데 내가다 나 말이 바샤지 사티기 디와 디네 디네 때 가다 와 이때 통통 말이 디네 디디 왔습니다 대 디비용게 다 같이 디바이나 다 뭐니 토고 말스 맞아 사치모 때도 못 봐나시 와 디네 사티기 때도 디네 사 때도 못 봐나시 다 때디 말이 바샤지다 대 디네 다 뭐니 토고 말스 와 대 디세도 뭐니 토고 말와 뭐니 토고 말에 뭐니 토바이나 말이 바샤지다 빠는 거와 말이 바샤지다 빠는 거 다 말이 바샤지다 뭐니 토야다 바치 쪼데 다 간다 비차도 다 바샤들와 머리 바샤이사 어디 또 두고 말이지 근데 대 디시 대 가디 자와이나 머리 바샤 가디 자나 다 뭐니고 토바레스 다 뭐니고 토바레스 로아 다 뭐니고 토바레 다 가서 대 전부의 디시지 사데 로아 대 전부 여봐 학원된 예시지가 해지게 사 디커도 파 세데파 원에 되올라 된두스네 된두스네 다대 학원에 또 나봐 하고 와 다 대낭시 다 뭐니고 간다 디시리 때니 머리 빠차때 파 가디 잡아이나 다 뭐니고 다 라바 잡아나시 토거스
mari baca kisah di kadu pang ina de moni gu de toge mo
가디 뻥아 다 뭐니고 그래서 제대로 와
So the grounds of the imprints of ignorance is likened to the great earth. So, and under this great earth, there is a treasure of precious stones or precious jewels lies underground, and those ordinary beings or beings such as ordinary beings. So without those, without clairvoyance, then they do not see there is a treasure of precious jewels, and then they do not know the whereabouts of this treasure, and then their hand cannot reach this treasure of precious jewels as well. So similar to this analogy, and beings are obscured by the grounds of the imprints of ignorance from completely seeing the very self-arisen essence. So the self-arisen essence refers to the Tathāgata essence or the Sukkata essence. And ordinary beings, they are obscured from completely seeing this Sukkata essence because of the grounds of the imprints of ignorance. So these grounds of imprints of ignorance obscures ordinary beings from completely seeing the very self-arisen essence or the Sukkata essence. So therefore, ordinary beings are unable to attain a nature truth body. So in order to attain nature truth body, the grounds of the imprints of ignorance must be abandoned. And without abandoning the grounds of the imprints of ignorance, then one is unable to attain nature truth body. And whenever the grounds of the imprints of ignorance is abandoned, then one will attain the nature truth body. So such as someone showing that the treasure of precious jewels is here, and then they dig it out, and then they see directly they see the treasure of precious jewels, and their hand obtain the precious jewels. So through this, then whenever just like this, so whenever the grounds of imprints of ignorance is abandoned, then they attain the nature truth body. Next is verse 140. It indicates number six defilement. It says, just as a seedling and so forth, by growing gradually, breaks through the husk of a seed, so the realizations of suchness destroys the abandonments on the path of seeing. So they explain verse 140. He says, the objects of abandonments of the path of seeing are similar to fruit peels, because just as a seed coat is broken open by the gradual productions of the sprout and so forth, likewise, the objects of abandonments of the path of seeing are overcome by the direct perceptions of suchness. So the objects of abandonments of the path of seeing are likened to fruit peels. So fruit peels or seed coat, or fruit peels or seed coat. So because just as a seed coat is broken open by the gradual productions of the sprout and so forth, so when sprout grows, and then the seed coat will crack or will break open, and then the sprout will emerge. So similar to this, then the objects of abandonments of the path of seeing are overcome by the direct perceptions of suchness. Another way of saying this is when one attains the direct perceptions of suchness, then one will be free from the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing. 태민기 통람 남조람
남조라 터와 고고로와 나머지 통합 받치면은 줘라 간섭 담으면서도 대면 통합 받치면은 줘라 다 되게 공부하다가 파문에 제 당연히 제를 모두 번님부 민이지 카투짜리를 모두 그 빠도야 말아 빠도야 말아 다 공인의 제 당연히 진의 리바기도 다고 대면 통합 나눠서 대야 뭐죠 대토들이 대모도서리 어따데 용료도 줘봐나지 된 통받아 빵사 난 통받아 빵사니 예 통받대 빵비 나눠라도 뭐 주잖아 통받 나눠라 되는 줘 통받 나눠라 되는 줘봐 대다 누구 시 사비게 빠빠데 용료도 줘봐니 되네 줘봐 좋아 Did some more. You would rimba ida chia de, rimba tambo rimba papa rimba ida machine de, to to a pachina. Pachina, Pachina, the Kate Tiani, when it checked the court, so Gila Chema as will, Gila Chema as Sunday, one will, Mother Gila Chema so. The Kadipan, Aquia, Nimbo Tishiga, Tonanola said, Ding, Hoyando, Todi, I'm going to tell you, I'm talking about the punch. Then talk about the point of it, Tomapo Nanola the Mother Jew, said that, Tomapo Nanola the Mother Jew, Sabi, Shibate, Yatroi, then you go with the Jews, I didn't get that. What? Some Sua. Pachimena Teda, Nuya Tamu to my Jody, Kalea Jody, Papa Samaba Shiti of Roa. Then you are Jumbo Channel, Papa Samashita one. Shit, Papa Samashita, Nanola Beja. Nanola Beja. Papa remember the Shigede, Nuite, Pachina Beja. The Pachina. What that did it doesn't do it.
So the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing here is refers to the paths of attempt. The objects of abandonment refers to the objects of abandonment of Hinayana path of seeing. And these objects of abandonment of Hinayana path of seeing are similar to a seed. Or you can say fruit peels or a seed coat. So then Geshe-la explained that it is similar to a seed because when the sprout emerge, then the seed become no longer exist. So when sprout emerges, then the seed become non-existent, or the seed no longer exists. So that is so the emergence of so that is the emergence of the sprout. So similar to this analogy, so when so the Hinayana uninterrupted path of Hinayana path of seeing. Hinayana uninterrupted path of the uninterrupted path of Hinayana path of seeing, directly realizing the selflessness of person, act as a direct antidote to the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing. So that is at the beginning stage. At that beginning stage, the sprout is slowly formed within the seed coat, and the seed coat is still intact, so it's not cracked or it's not broken open yet. So, however, this uninterrupted path of Hinayana path of seeing, directly realizing the selflessness of person, is able to make so is able to make those objects of abandonment of the path of seeing not able to manifest themselves. So even probably I explained the meaning first. So uninterrupted path of Hinayana path of seeing, directly realizing the selflessness of person, act as a direct antidote to the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing. So at that time, it is unable to abandon those objects of abandonment yet. So the uninterrupted path of Hinayana path of seeing is unable to abandon those objects of abandonment yet. However, this uninterrupted path of seeing is able to make those objects of abandonment not able to manifest themselves. And when the uninterrupted path of seeing is gradually or is continually meditated upon, so then it slowly develops its strength. So when the uninterrupted path of seeing becomes or transform into the liberated path of Hinayana path of seeing, so then it abandons. Then the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing are abandoned. Yeah. So the emergence of the liberated path of Hinayana path of seeing and the abandonment of so when the liberated path of Hinayana path of seeing emerges, it abandons the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing. So then this is the meaning. So I repeat the meaning again. So the uninterrupted path of Hinayana, path of seeing, directly realizing the selflessness of person, acts as a direct antidote to the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing. At that point, it is unable to abandon those objects of abandonment. However, it is able to make those objects of abandonment not able to manifest in the continuum. And when this uninterrupted path of seeing is gradually meditated, and the ability is gradually developed, and when uninterrupted path of seeing transform into the liberated path of seeing, then it abandons the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing. So at the stage of the during the stage of the uninterrupted path of seeing, those objects of abandonment are not yet abandoned. They are unable. The uninterrupted path is unable to abandon them yet. And when the uninterrupted path transforms into the entity of liberated path of seeing, then it becomes then it is able to abandon those objects of abandonment of the path of seeing. So
can we say it's a path of release?
A path of release, yeah, or the liberated path, yeah.
Uninterrupted path of release, right? When everything's abandoned. Can we say that?
Yeah, path of release. Yeah, I say liberated path. So sometimes it's translated as liberated path, sometimes it's translated as path of release. Yeah, so it's good to use the path of release as well. So I changed the terms. So whenever the uninterrupted path of seeing transform into the entity of the path of release of Hinayana, of path of seeing, then it is able to abandon those objects of abandonment, those objects of abandonment of the path of seeing. So during the stage of the uninterrupted path, those objects of abandonment are not yet abandoned. And on the stage of path of release, then those objects of abandonment are abandoned. So then to correlate this meaning with the analogy, so during the stage of uninterrupted path of seeing, Hinayana path of seeing, then it's like the development of the sprout within the seed coat. So the seed coat is not yet broken open. And then when uninterrupted path of seeing transform into the entity of path of release of path of seeing, then that is the the sprout. The sprout emerges, and the seed the seed coat breaks open. So it illustrates that the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing are abandoned. Next verse is verse 141. It indicates the seventh defilement. It says, through familiarization with Arya paths, the core of the view of the transitory collection is overcome. The objects of abandonment by the exalted wisdom of the path of meditation are illustrated by tethered ropes. To explain verse 141. The objects of abandonment by the exalted wisdom of the path of meditation are thought to be similar to tethered ropes because through having applied the highest path as an antidote to the objects of abandonment for a long time, they are the remainder of the destructions of the imputation, the essence of the view of the transitory collection. So the destructions of the imputation refers to the destructions of the imputed afflictions, the essence of the view of the transitory collection. 지다기 녀몽기 군다데
지다 군다야나
녀몽 군다
지다 군다라 녀몽 지다 군다래 간다다 녀몽 버와
녀몽 군다로
녀몽 군다
녀몽 군다
녀몽이 지다 군다로 나기로와 녀몽만 지다 군다 녀몽만 지다 군다데 간다 담에서 테메 통화 빠체 말랑지 은혜 제네 나노라 되게 빵사네 에스티 와 나노라 되게 빵사디 다 가르 하데서 다 라파데 파파데 모두 당연히 빠바시바나시로와 휴체보 맞아 배 영어 휴체보 빠바시바나시 담이 월 개발을 하든 하다와 10월 빠바시바나 레마도 다 나노 하든 있을 거다와 맞아 컴퓨터고 지나 주로 빠바도 바꿔서 나노 서비스 통요와 대단시 당가서 컴퓨터 집발이와 컴퓨터와 이제 주로게 참아서 고자다 동나가 주로도 고자리 사실 나노 시들 하더라고 사실 하더라고 주로 빠바도 고나서 사와 이제 다 너무 시들 하더라고 다 대단시 통나 마체면하게 영무빈 기타 군다들라 미네치네 통나 나도라 되기 군다데 영무 군다데 빠레 마도 다 참모다스나 대시스나 안다 빠마도가지 하데 한번 하보지 하데스 간다 빠마도가지 하데스 빠마도가지 하데스 맞아 컴부기 주로 빠바라서 주로 사바나지 나노 시도 하바나지 지 하데스 다들 하야데 그래서 다 공바 고나 도지다가 띵인지 다 빵. 다들 빵기를 쓰르스나 다 고나 도지다가 띵인지게 고나 도지 띵인지 다 띵이 고나 도지다가 띵인지 세워다 다 된지 있어요. 다 가서
공람
고나 도지다가 띵인지 우도와 고나 도지다가 띵인지 세워대 다 가서 담에라 가서 담에 메스도베 고나 받치면아 다 고나 받치면아 생각들에 된다. 고나 받치면아 가서 담에 메스도베 다 니티지 고나 받치면아 다 니티지 고나 니티지 고나 받치면아와 니티지 고나 받치면아 다 니티지 고나 도지다가 띵인지는 되그래 된다와
니티지 공람 받치면아
고나 받치면아 다 니티지 고나 받치면아 되기 다 공바데라 하보 근데 지다 끝다 방사디 다 하보 여러와 하보 공바데라 눈이지 고나 받치면아 되기 눈이지 고나 도지다가 띵인지라나 되그러와 간다 가서 담에 메스도 고나 받치면아 되래 가서 담에 메스 고나 받치면아 되래 다 되기 눈이지 다 되기 눈이지 다 가디 보는 것이나 다 테메지 모로나 가디 토바이나 다 테메지 모로나 토바다 대범이 나로라 토바 고바 대범이 나로라 토
공다 양게서는 데 토람 테미기 밀로람 어디 토와이나
테메지 모로나 가디 토스나 고바도 바로 그 고바도 바로 다 보자 가마도 고바도 바로 다 고바도 뻥바다 테메지 모로나 토바다 테메 다치마 토바 되냐래 테메 모로나 토바다 테메 나로라 토바다 와 나로라 토 대범이 나로라 토바다 고바범이 나로라 토바다 고바범이 나로라 토바다 테메지 모로나 토바다 다치마 예수가 토바 되냐 예수가 토바 되냐 와 다디 종다 도서다 와 종다 도서 하데 맞아 방자 하마세 로가 이제까지나 컴퓨터로 빠바스 거 나노 서비스 하바도 지로 시 딜레페이션 지고
하나는 데 가서 녀몽 지다베 군다 남조람 데 통람기 남조람 데 방차로
통람 남조라 되기다 녀몽 지다 군다서 방차로 단 지다 군다서 방차에 제라 다 고양자 가르 방야치 쓰고서 다 공부 방야치 dia 쩌는데 그거 보나리야 더 원하지 못도 이야기 바기도 됐다 공부 방야치 쓰는 거야 다 들으면 방야 로디
The nyomongi jitagi kunda diang di kazani nyomong kunda di kazan nyomongi kunda yana nyomong kunda.
너무 지탁군다. 너무 지탁군다.
어디가 타니 요사 말이 nyomong kunda.
지탁군다 가지고 용다 돼요. 지탁군다.
지다군다 타니를
또 너무군다 가지고.
nyomong kunda로.
야야. 너무군다 가지고.
nyomong kunda ini anti nyomong be kunda를.
다 군다.
yana de nyomong ini kunda다 랭게니가 요지 ini dia nyomong de kunda대로. 맞어.
군다 생각해서 나빠라. 맞지.
So to explain this, the meaning of verse 141. So the objects of abandonment by the exalted wisdom of the path of meditation are thought to be similar to tethered ropes, because through having applied the highest path as an antidote to the objects of abandonment for a long time. So here it refers to the path of seeing. So having applied the highest path as an antidote to the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing, for a long time, and then the imputations here refers to those imputed afflictions. So those imputed afflictions have been destroyed, and they are remainders of the destructions. And so these imputed afflictions are abandoned by the path of release of path of seeing, right? So, and then they have already been abandoned by the path of release of path of seeing. So, and another way of saying this is the coarse afflictions have been abandoned. The coarse afflictions have been abandoned by the path of release of path of seeing. So, and what are and they are remainders. So, what remains is the subtle one. So, the subtle afflictions. Another way of saying this is those spontaneous, those spontaneous, innate, sorry. So those innate afflictions remains. So at that point of time, innate afflictions are not yet abandoned. So they are, the liberated path of the path of release of path of seeing is unable to abandon those innate or the subtle afflictions yet. So, and then Geshe-la gives an example. It's like a peach. So when you eat the peach, and then what left is the seed of the peach, right? So the seed of the peach is not yet abandoned. So therefore, so therefore, in order to abandon these subtle innate afflictions, so we need to the one that abandoned the subtle afflictions is the Vajra-like meditative stabilization of path of meditation. The Vajra-like meditative stabilization of path of meditation. So, in other way of saying this is the uninterrupted path of meditation of hearers, for example. So the uninterrupted path of meditation is the one that act as an antidote to these objects of abandonment of the path of meditation. So uninterrupted path of meditation. In other way of saying this is Vajra-like meditative stabilization of path of meditation acts as an direct antidote to these remaining objects of abandonment, which is the objects of abandonment of the path of meditation. So whenever one attains the a path of no more learning, whenever one attains the Hinayana path of no more learning, so that is at the same time one abandons the objects of abandonment of the path of meditation, and simultaneously one attains the path of no more learning of Hinayana, and one attains the Hinayana arhatship. So I repeat. So in connections with previous verse, in connections with the objects of abandonment, in connections with the path of uninterrupted path of seeing. So here, verse 141, it talks about this uninterrupted path of path of seeing, directly realizing the selflessness of person. So it has already abandoned the objects of abandonment. Sorry, no, so this is not, yeah. So, sorry, I rephrase. So in connections with previous verse, the uninterrupted path of seeing, directly realizing the selflessness of person, acts as a direct antidote to the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing, and has already been abandoned. Yeah, and these objects of abandonment have already abandoned by the path of release of path of seeing. So which means those afflictions, the coarse afflictions, have already been abandoned. And what left is the subtle innate afflictions. So they are the remainders. So at that point of time, this liberated path of, this path of release of path of seeing is unable to abandon those subtle innate afflictions. So it's just like the example of a peach. So when you eat the flesh and then the seed left, right? So there is still seed to be abandoned. So then we need to cultivate the Vajra-like meditative stabilization of path of meditation. Another way of saying this is uninterrupted path of Hinayana path of meditation. So it acts as a direct antidote to these objects of abandonment of path of meditation, which is the remainder of the destructions of the imputation. And then whenever one attains the path of no more learning, Hinayana path of no more learning, so simultaneously one abandons the objects of abandonment of path of meditation, one attains the path of no more learning of Hinayana, and one attains the Hinayana arhatship.
But the Himila Peter was a competition that I was sure. Was a company Kansas, Kambushlo was had he know come Kansas, Kansas, no service had show Papa Trouble you are in the Kansas. That no has so there were that day not to company Kansas no Sayade. Nano do the Sabi no Sayura. Nano de Sayala, that Tambushlo come Babash. Say was not Sawa. Shlo come Baba the sheep. Come Baba de Tomba la Pesha. Tomba, image Tomba. Tomba de Shlo Baba the Ma, she may buy out the din Tomba la Pesha. Tomba.
The
Shlo
Toto de
that is Ma, she had a machine that Baba the Tomba la Pesha. This shit on the Tomba the Bombashi. Tomba Bansa. That Bomba the Pala, that come Kansas, come in no trouble the one. Trouble Kansas. That Kansas the Ma, Charlie, Kansas Charlie, no Nimbo Dewa, Nimbo Saura. That Nimbo Sala, Garche was not. That Kansas the Ma Jala, Matiala, Bomba Space. Bomba the image, Bomba de Papa, and now Kansas the Ma Charlie. The Ma Charlie, Ma Meba Sade, Bomba, Ma Panto, Bomba Pantochi. The Meba Sabata Bomba Pantochi. That now was Sabe when Nimbo Sahoya. That Nimbo the Sasadi, then Timidachum Matsuri, that Mari Pasha sat upon Timidachum, Nimbo the Mari Pasha sat, Pesha. No pay Nimbo Sajua, but they Mari Pasha, they pounded it, they sounded it, that Mari Pasha sat upon Timidachum. They Kadi Rabaina, that Mari Pasha sat upon this.
Mari Pachagi?
Mari Pasha sat. Mari Pasha sat down, Jubagoa, that Mari Pasha sat. Yes, Nimbo the Rabat.
The Nanglo Toto de Nisawina.
What that is that this has a Kadi Rabaina, that Dutchman Sanji Pator, that Dutchman. That Tambo, Niti, Timidalea, Tambo Toma Pangoa, Timidalea, or Sanji Kuba, Sanji Kuba to that, Sabit Rasani, Sanji Kuba, no Nimbo Sajua, Nimbo Sad, Kadi Sa Rasana, Mari Pasha Sapon, Mari Pasha Sapua, Mari Pasha Sap.
Mari Pachas Pang and the Sangi Gong. Yang the teaching Gama Shigio. Timmy
Mari Pachas upon the Dutchman, the digital show. Needed Dutchman, 담보 야 밑에 저쪽 공부하자라 도만 통과 방법아 담보 통과 통과를 다 감시로 빼샤 통과를
캄부치로지
감시로 사야죠 어디 다 단다 도도 가서 너무 님보도 사야라 라라 감시로 빠바치고 봐 시시 빠바자 이 빠바치의 통과 빼자 통과도 가서 뭐지 이 제라 공부하다 보면 간사도 잡고 나 님보 사야 간사도 잡고 이 공부 이 가지 잡고 배다 공부 방법지 와 다 너무 님보다 가지 살았으나 네 말이 빠져있어야 봐.
갑디나 데 테민 대신 기차요.
근데 말이 빠져있어야 방법이 다 기질이야. 이제 로사라 운도사야. 양도사라. 그거 말이 내가 다 좀 속에 빠샤까지 보는 상지 공부하는 거야. 너무 반사라고 하거든요. 너무 반사라. 다 빠샤까지 보는 다 좀 공부하고 상지 공부하는 상지 공부하는 그래서 가를 하지는 빠샤도 하디로 봐야 돼. 다 빠져야 돼. 봐야 돼. 가서 컴퓨터에 빠다 놓고 되면 빼셔야 돼. 되면 빼셔야 돼. 되면 민박에 너무 상지지 공부도 다 되면지 가다 돼. 상지지 공부 토야라. 아무 토마 되면지 돈받아 보는 거야. 돈받아 컴퓨터 쉬로 빠봐서 되지. 다 되지라 공부 보는 거야. 공부도 컴퓨터 강사 맞도 자 컴퓨터 강사도 맞자서는 자사로 와. 또 잡아도 맞자서는 다 공부도 방사 맞지. bomba da peixe. Tá não ninguém sabe aonde. Tá bomba acha mari pacha está. Mari pacha não. Tá ninguém sabe aonde. Tá mari pacha está quanto. Tá sanji time da chuma. E sanji como. Tá dele pe campo tá de bom ya code.
So this piece is a very suitable analogy to illustrate how one attains the state of enlightenment. So in relation to the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing and the objects of abandonment of the path of meditation, together with the grounds of the imprints of ignorance. So piece, so in order to obtain or to eat the peach kernel. So when we say peach, then usually we eat the flesh, and then you see the peach, the seed, and then the seed. You can see the peach pits, a very hard round shape, usually round shaped, and then within these peach pits, still there is a seed. There is a seed of the peach. So the flesh together with the skin, and then is illustrated by the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing, and then that peach pits, the heart, the peach pits, and if you crack open, then the seeds is within these peach pits. So that peach pits is illustrates objects of abandonment of the path of meditation. And then when you crack these peach pits open, and when you eat the seeds, and then Papa de Angure. Papa de Maripacha. And this seed then is still covered by a very thin layer of skin, right? So I'm not sure whether this is a proper words to illustrate. It's like peanuts, then there is a thin layer, right? So similarly, this peach seeds is also covered by a thin layer of skin. And then this skin is illustrated by, this skin illustrates the grounds of the imprints of ignorance. And when you remove these and then you eat it, and then that is when one attains the state of enlightenment. So this, therefore, Geshe-la explained these objects of abandonment of the path of seeing, objects of abandonment of the path of meditation, and the grounds of the imprints of ignorance with the analogy of peach. So peach together, the flesh, then those flesh, skin, and etc., the outer skin, then illustrates the objects of abandonment of the path of seeing. And then the peach pit illustrates the objects of abandonment of the path of meditation. And then when you crack this pit open, and then you see the seed lies within, and then it's still covered by a very thin layer of skin. And that illustrates the grounds of the imprints of ignorance. So when we remove this, and then you eat we eat the seed, and then that illustrates the attainments of enlightenment. So this is how a Hinayana practitioner attains the state of enlightenment. So with the analogy, which is illustrated by the analogy of peach. We stop here and we dedicate and we conclude with dedication. We dedicate these roots of virtue to the flourishing of the Dharma and to the excellent happiness of all sentient beings. And we also dedicate these roots of virtue to all upholders of Buddha Dharma, illustrated by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, to live eons long, to live eons long, to have excellent health, and may all their enlightened activities and holy wishes be accomplished instantaneously and spread in all directions. And we also dedicate these roots of virtue to our beloved teacher, Gyaltsab Lama Zopa Rinpoche. May Rinpoche's holy wishes be accomplished instantaneously without any obstacle. And we also dedicate these roots of virtue to world peace. May excellent happiness prevail throughout the world. May wars, conflicts, disaster, natural disaster, pandemic diseases be pacified immediately. And we also dedicate these roots of virtue especially to those who pass away due to these conditions. May all their negativities accumulated since beginningless time be pacified immediately and quickly achieve the state of enlightenment. Keba nyamba me bayang kone kondo pewa sho tuni nije sundo jupe lang chiche sese kanje ten luke chana pimo tizin gaso la deso shende lundo sho dite kante pete malu ba kanle jungwe sambe ishino kante tsume tizin gaso la deso tushe lundo sho tame teba kese ye rang so lo sang kewa yap se kyuwa je raja shige kayo malewa tende memba trube kele so trube tute rinpoche shedang trube zijing pewa la nayang mi shun sobe koja jen tsume jezu lama so wa de pende malu koji bo kewe tenda ma gyu ru wa yi tena ji do tsamba zebe mo lo bo shi wa shi te yi re ba wen da chu su ge su jin la dang ke se nang je tu ge la bo jen do me te be yang lu sa be zo tu je be do nyu je ju ma ra ra ye ko we shin ga de pen nang de wa ma lu jung we ne che re se wa de zin ga zo yi sha be si de pa tu teng yu ji